Hi guys, welcome back. I'm here at Laurel Lake Camp, and I'm here for family camp, so that's why I'm not with you here today. We're in our seventh part of the series on the Ten Commandments. That's the seventh commandment. So let's look at that. Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. It says, "You shall not commit adultery." It's written in the negative. And so God, the heart of this, the love of the Ten Commandments and the heart of the Ten Commandments and the character of God in the Ten Commandments is God doesn't want a break in a relationship. And so let's look at that. Well, Jesus was asked what to do with this topic in Matthew chapter 19. So if you have your Bibles, let's go there. Matthew 19. "And it came to pass," verse 1, "when Jesus had finished these sayings, that he departed from Galilee, and he came to the region of Judea beyond the Jordan, and a great multitude followed him, and he healed them there. And the Pharisees came to him, testing him, saying, 'Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason?'" And it seems like this was even happening in their day like it is today. I heard something this week where someone was getting a divorce because they disagreed about an MLM, a multi-level marketing campaign, who they were going to sell to, and they are getting a divorce. And so here, Jesus is asked, is it okay to get a divorce, just for any reason? And so Jesus goes and looks at marriage. Let's look at it, verse 4. "And he answered them and said to them, 'Have you not read that he made them at the beginning?'" This is creation referring to when he made them. "Made them male and female, and said, 'For this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh.'" Jesus is hearkening back to creation, back with Adam and Eve, and he says, this is what he intended marriage to be, a man and a woman, and coming together as one. Goes on to say, "So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let no man separate." This is what God had intended at creation. And you know what? Society and sin has wiggled its way in and is dividing these relationships, these friendships. And it was happening in their day. So they asked him, "Why then did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away?" And Jesus says to them, "Moses, because the hardness of your hearts permitted you to divorce your wives. Because of the hardness of your heart, divorce is there. But from the beginning, it was not permitted so. It was not so. From the beginning, it was not so. It wasn't God's intention." And you say, why divorce? Well, it goes on to say, "I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. And whoever marries her who is divorced commits adultery also." This is what Jesus says is adultery. Breaking a marriage relationship and going and becoming one with someone else. And so the disciples, I like them. They says, disciples said to him, "If such is the case of the man with his wife, it is better not to marry." And isn't that the case today? People just don't get married. Why get married if you're going to have a divorce? It's like the commitment level, it just isn't there. There's another passage that talks about this problem of adultery, and we find it in Proverbs chapter 6. Proverbs chapter 6, verse 20. Let's read this. It gives us some insight to this process of adultery. How does it happen? Adultery is having a relationship with someone outside of marriage. So Proverbs 6, verse 20, it says, "My son, keep your father's command and do not forsake the law of your mother. Bind them continually upon your heart. Tie them around your neck. When you roam, they will lead you. When you sleep, they will keep you. And when you awake, they will speak with you. For the commandment is a lamp. Did you catch that? The commandment is a lamp. And the law a light. Reproof of instruction are the way of life. And so Proverbs here is instructing us to listen to wisdom. It's like, keep it with us wherever we go. And then notice what it says after this, verse 24. To keep you from the evil woman, and you could say man here, from the flattering tongue of a seductress. Do not lust after her beauty in your heart, nor let her allure you with her eyes. Nor let her allure you with her eyelids. For by means of a harlot, a man is reduced to a crust of bread, and an adulteress will prey upon his precious life. He says, hey, don't think about the one that's going to get you into trouble. Don't let it stay in your heart. Goes on to say, can a man take fire in his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be seared? So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her shall not be innocent. People do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he is starving. Like, it makes sense. Yet, when he is found, he must restore sevenfold. He may have to give up all the substance of his house. There's still consequences. But then notice what it says. Whoever commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding. He who does so destroys his own soul. And you may say, hey, this is just between me and this other person. Who is it going to hurt? But it hurts us. It hurts us, people around us. It hurts our families. We see what happens in marriages and relationships when they're broken. There's cause and effect. And Proverbs says, it's not wise. And so don't go after that. Don't think about it. Well, there's another passage in Proverbs, chapter 5, actually. Let's go there, verse 18, Proverbs 5, verse 18. It says, let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice with the wife of your youth. Gets a little bit graphic here. As a loving deer and a graceful doe, let her breasts satisfy you at all times, and be enraptured with her love. For why should you, my son, be enraptured with an immoral woman, and be embraced in the arms of a seductress? For the ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. His own iniquities entrap him, the wicked man, and he is caught in the cords of his sin. He shall die for lack of instruction, and in the greatness of his folly he shall go astray. Guys, wisdom is here. He says, don't go after this. It's not going to end good. Matthew chapter 5 talks about adultery. And he says, gets to the heart of the matter, Jesus does. He says, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. We've heard that, and we read this a little bit last week. And he's referencing the Ten Commandments. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. And then there's this word in verse 28 that changes everything. It's this word, but. We've talked about it over and over and over. It says, but I say to you. He says, there's a little bit more. There's the heart of the matter. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. We're living in a world where this is like a pandemic. This problem of looking and lusting is everywhere. It's in the heart is where it starts and takes place. Matthew 15, verse 19 says, "For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, and adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, and blasphemies." Adultery is put in that same category as murder. And so when we read there in Matthew 5, if you've lusted after somebody, and this isn't just men to women, this is women to men also, it starts in the heart. James gets to the heart of this matter, and I think this might help us in recognizing what's going on in our own lives. James chapter 1, verse 13. James chapter 1 and verse 13, it says this, "Let no one say when he is tempted, 'I am tempted by God.' For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone." Did you catch that? God doesn't tempt you. The things coming against you, they're from the other guy. And then it says, but, verse 14, "But," where does the temptation come? "But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed." All right, so you look at something and you start thinking about it. It's enticing you, it's drawing you in. And we talked about this several weeks ago with the story of David and Bathsheba. Then it says, when desire has conceived, right? It's using this birthing language. It gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. So, we see this progression. And where can it stop? It can stop at the beginning. Temptation in and of itself is not a sin, but it's when we let it stay. I've heard that you can keep a bird from making a nest in your own hair, right? How do you do that? Well, you keep it from landing there. And so the things we think about, the things we dwell upon, are going to lead in progression to action unless we stop it where it starts, at the heart. There's a passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 that I want to look at that talks about marriage. And I think it leads to some things about what it is intended for and how we need to see it. Sometimes this passage has been used in an unhealthy way, but I want to maybe correct that. So let's look at this. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1. It says, "Now concerning the things of which you wrote to me." Now, who's writing this? Well, this is Paul writing this. And we have to remember, Paul is writing this from a perspective of not being married. Okay? So just take this with a grain of salt. He says, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Does that mean we can't touch any women? Well, no, let's keep reading. "Nevertheless, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband." All right, so we get this principle here of a man and a woman sharing relationship as one, and not to share that with others. Verse 3 says, "Let the husband render to his wife the affection due to her." All right, that sounds good. Let the husband show affection, show love and care towards her. And then it says, "And likewise, also the wife to her husband." Remember when Jesus said about marriage at the beginning that he created male and female to come together, leave their father and mother and come together as one. That's what we're seeing here. Goes on to say, verse 4, "The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does." And many people stop reading there, thinking the man has authority over the wife. And then it says, "And likewise. And likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Did you catch that? There's this equality taking place in marriage. They're becoming as one. So it's not this power over, but they're serving each other. They're in this together. Oftentimes, this is not the case. We see this being played out as a one-sided thing. They only read one half of this text, but not the whole thing. It goes on to say, verse 5, do not deprive one another except with consent for a time, agreement, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Right? If there's time you need to stay away from each other, that's okay. And then it says, but I say this as a concession, and not as a commandment. Did you notice that? He doesn't say this is a commandment, this is the way you have to do things, but remember, he wasn't married himself. For I wish that all men, notice this, all men were even as I myself, single. But each one has his own gift from God, one in this manner and another in that. And so we have to look here. I think looking at this passage gives to the fact that God intends marriage to work together and to not look elsewhere because we have each other. We've become one. Now, is this at all cost? Remember, we read earlier that there's a place for divorce, it says, for sexual immorality, when one goes off and betrays that relationship. When one breaks that relationship, that trust, those vows that were made at the wedding. But it's not just with sex. It's other things. Abuse, that's breaking down that relationship. It's saying, I no longer value you anymore. You're saying, no longer do I value you in sickness and health because I'm causing the sickness, the hurt. And so this is breaking that also. This is not God's intention. Obviously, sin has crept in everywhere. There's one last passage I want to look at. It's in the book of John, chapter 8. And here in John chapter 8, verse 1, Jesus is presented with how to deal with someone that's been caught in adultery. And I think this gives us some tools to how we can treat others. So we've looked at what God intended originally in the Garden of Eden and in relationships is for them to become one. And that it's not wise to look elsewhere and be satisfied with who you are with and work with what you have. Make that better. And to come together and as one and work together as one. And then Jesus is presented with a problem. Because sin does happen. Relationships are still breaking in society. So what do we do? Well, let's look at that. Because we may look and say, hey, I don't have that problem. And praise the Lord, you don't. But other people might. And so how do we treat them? We look at the standard here. This is the choice I don't want to make, adultery. You don't want to go that path. But what if people do? So let's look. But Jesus went, verse 8, or chapter 8, verse 1. But Jesus went out to the Mount of Olives. Now early in the morning, he came again to the temple, to church. And all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. And the scribes and the Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. Then when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery. And then here's some of the words that I find very interesting. In the very act. Now, if you know anything how this works, it takes two people. So where's the other guy? It says she was caught in the very act, so it sounds like it was maybe a setup, or maybe one of the guys is right there. I don't know. But it seemed to me here that the woman is the one getting the bad end. And isn't that oftentimes what happens in society? And so they say, teacher, this woman was caught in adultery. In the very act. Had she done it? Yes. Now, verse 5. Now Moses, in the law, commanded us that such should be stoned. And actually it says they both should be stoned. So where's the guy? But what do you say? Those words change everything. But what do you say? This they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. And then there's a word, a powerful word, but. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger as though he did not hear. And I think this is the first principle that we need to look at. When people bring something, a gossip, hey, didn't you hear about so-and-so? We should look down as though we did not hear. He stooped down and wrote with his finger. So they continued asking him, and he raised himself up and said to them, notice this, he who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And then something happened. After he said these words, he who is without sin. Well, who has sin? Well, we all have, right? Then those who heard it, being convicted in their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest even to the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. The people around that were ready to stone her, all of a sudden they realized there's some things in their life that needed to be fixed before they could cast that stone. And so they left. They got out of there as soon as they could. And so who's left? Jesus is there, and the woman is there. Then Jesus raised himself up and saw no one but the woman. And he said to her, Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? Got a frog over there making noise. Has no one condemned you? You know what she says? She said, No one, Lord. Now I want you to notice something. Who there was without sin? The woman clearly had sin in her life. That the people that brought her there had sin, and so they left. So who was left without sin to throw the stone? Well, Jesus was. By his own criteria, he was there without sin, and he could have picked up the stone and thrown it at her, as he just said. But notice what he does. Jesus said to her, Neither do I condemn you. Did you catch that? She was caught in the act. She was guilty, and he says, Neither do I condemn you. This is counterintuitive to our nature. We want to point the finger. He says, Neither do I condemn you. And then he says a few other words. He says, Go and sin no more. Guys, this is the heart of what God is getting at with the Ten Commandments. He's looking at our life. He shows us the Ten Commandments. Maybe it shows us how we've failed him. That's where the neither do I condemn you. It says that we're guilty, but then our forgiveness comes from him. And then he says, Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. I think this is the heart of it. This is how we need to treat those around us when they fall. Not just blanket covering of sin whenever someone is hurting us. By all means, don't live in a relationship of abuse. But when someone else has realized what they've done, don't condemn them. Do like Jesus, say, neither do I condemn you. But then go and sin no more. I care about you enough. Let's try to have a remedy to this problem. Isn't that what Christ wants? Because adultery hurts, not Jesus, but it hurts ourselves. It hurts others. It hurts our families. It tears apart relationships. It's not worth it. It's never worth it. So guys, you may find yourself on many sides of this. Maybe you know someone, maybe you're experiencing some of this in your own life. And do look at James, how it said, when temptation comes, don't let it continue on thinking about it in your heart and acting upon it, but let it go away. And when someone else has fallen into temptation, come around alongside them and help them. Let's have prayer. God, this topic is a harder one. It's maybe not one that we want to talk about or think about, but yet it is prevalent in the world today. The disciples said it's easier not even to get married, but that's not a solution, at least not in the way the world does it today. You're after commitment. You're after coming together and working as one. And so that's the model you give us in the Ten Commandments. So thank you for that. Give us the courage and the courage and the grace for the people around us. In your name, amen. Hey guys, thanks for being with me this week, and we'll be on to our number 8 next week. Have a blessed week.